Hey,
We'll have more options.
I'm introducing us again.
Okay.
You're live.
All right, and we're live. This is the first time we've done a live stream on this channel, but once again, my name is Zach Williams, and welcome to Bad Hominem. Today we have not only the Michael Morgan, the beautiful individual that you have seen on previous videos, but we have one of my best friends since somewhere after high school, Jonathan Rakers.
Also,
he's single and
great.
gorgeous.
Single and gorgeous.
This one is not single. Happens to be married to this one, but this is Taylor Morgan. And oh, that was tender. It was made me like butterflies right here, like flying away right now.
Excuse me, I need a drink.
But okay, so be well informed that this particular video might contain some content that you might find offensive, including language. So I would advise you to switch to one of the millions of other videos on the internet that currently might not offend you. I think all of the Barney series is currently on YouTube. So
you can find some really great Peppa Pig episodes that I'm sure you'll enjoy.
Peppa Pig. So if it I don't want to go further into it. But anyway, so what we had discussed before is that this gentleman here was actually going to interview us because it was his introduction to the channel. And he had a very pertinent question. Or it doesn't even matter if it was pertinent. It matters whether or not we could argue about it. So he's going to argue.
We could argue about anything.
Without further ado, he's going to introduce his question, and I'm going to let Michael take the stand.
Yes. Well, what I've had on my mind a lot lately is the idea of the death of the author. Because I believe it was recently, there was a high-profile director who said that the Marvel movies are not cinema because
they're crap movies.
Because they're commercialized Disney product placement.
I liked Endgame.
I like Marvel movies. They're good. They're okay. I don't know if I would call them cinema, but what the idea was that these people created something and passed it on, and now it's up to us as the viewers to determine whether it's worth what it means and its value to us as the consumers. And so I have had the idea of the death of the author on my mind a lot lately, and I wanted to pose that to this lovely group of people and see what they had to think about it.
And if you will, my position is that you run into sort of a handful for a dozen sort of situation where effectively your English teacher is telling you that the author writing about the curtains being blue means he's depressed, when the author was just writing about the curtains being blue. It's reading too much into it. I think the author is important to the end result, insofar as that much. Like, I'm not trying to read too much into it. Like, if you read a sort of emotional, debilitating episode from what the author is writing, you might be reading too much into it. Just read it as what it is. When Tolkien was writing about the spiders, I mean, it might have been a sphere about spiders, or it might have been just utilizing spiders as an effective tool of terror. It doesn't necessarily have to be a personal sort of event that he's been dealing with his whole life. That's where I'm at. You're dealing with authors as individuals, not as like superhuman sort of thinkers.
So we're kind of covering the sort of over depth that some analysts might go into whenever they're reading some work of art or some whatever it is. Like they're watching the new Joker movie or they're reading a classic work and they're reading too much into whatever this minute description was, as opposed to just taking the story as it is at face value without trying to decode everything. Right.
If people did that, then why would they even read the Scarlet Letter? That's my question.
Well, I think
for real.
No, the Scarlet Letter is one of my favorite works. I gotta say,
but it's also face value, and it's face value and not face value at the same time.
Well,
when you have an English teacher going on about how like the roses like represent some like the main character's like passion or something. I don't even remember what they represent. I just know that they represented something and they weren't even a big part of the story.
Right. Well, granted,
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
granted, Scarlet Letter is not exactly a pithy book, right? So like the author
I
goes
like it.
on. It is a good book,
I'm a-
but you have to take symbolism where symbolism is directly implied, right?
Right.
So for example,
exactly.
the
That's what I'm
title, the namesake of the book, Scarlet Letter, right? The Scarlet Letter explicitly is intended to represent something throughout the plot of the
Yes,
story,
yes.
right?
Mm.
It's the shame that Hester Prynne, the main protagonist of the book, wears the entire time,
And that, what's his name? The priest avoids,
and the priest
Mhm.
Hides
scorns and hides from, right?
even
And-
though he's completely
Guilt ridden.
yes.
And the name of the author is escaping me right now. It starts with a T. No,
Hawthorne.
Hawthorne. Yeah,
Thank
Henry
you.
Hawthorne, right?
I think it was Henry Hawthorne. It was
Henry
Hawthorne.
David Hawthorne, maybe.
Something Hawthorne.
Yeah, and basically he wrote a few other good books. One of which was Young Goodman Brown, which is a short story, and he talked about sort of the puritanical culture of the time, specifically in the 1600s, sort of like the sort of time we associate with the Salem witch trials. And in Young Goodman Brown, he talks about basically all of the people who were the good people of the town. You know, if you were to go into the woods at night, you'd find the same people worshiping the devil. Yeah, they called it as meeting the black man in the woods was his analogy he used for it. Not black man as we currently think of it, but black man as meaning like they were meeting the devil. They were summoning the devil in the woods, right? All of the people who would be the most verbose about condemning the witches in public would be the same
Most
people,
virtuous.
the most
Wasn't
publicly virtuous
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
about
I'll
condemning
give you that.
witchcraft
Yeah, absolutely.
in the puritanical Salem culture would be the same people that you'd see out worshiping the devil at night.
I know there's another book about that, but I'm spacing the name.
What was the content of the book? Like what was
What you're talking about, the Salem witch trials, and how it was like a few of the girls there, they like started accusing other people, and there was like this idea that they had like group thought going on, and that's why they thought there was witchcraft going on, and to
Well-
them it was real, but it ended up like ruining a lot of people's lives.
Well, even Hector Berlioz with his Symphony Fantastique, and then
That's a fun one.
it is a fun one. But then you have in the middle of that you have what is it, the Black Sabbath, the Witches' Sabbath. Like that represents that at the point right there. Within the middle of this grand symphony, you have the Witches' Sabbath.
Well, wasn't it more just like he killed his lover who scorned
Yeah.
him, and she just came back and was like, "I'm haunting you as
Yeah.
a witch."
All right,
Yes.
I'm gonna
So-
I'm gonna
I was
say
gonna
that
say, so-
Jono and I have like
We're, like,
nothing to
off
comment
topic.
on
I was
that
gonna say.
because we
Yeah.
don't know who you're talking about.
Yep.
but-
But bringing it back around, so to something a little bit more, I guess, germane that more people would get a grasp on. A good example of the relationship between the responsibility of the creator to express,
let's-
to bring
Let's
forth
go
their
to this.
message,
Yeah.
and the responsibility of the audience to properly interpret it
Yes.
and enter into a sort of a two-way communicative relationship. I watched a YouTube video recently from the Young Turks about
Oh,
how need I say more? And they said the opening line of this video review about the Joker movie was Joker has a problem with black women.
What?
Oh,
Why?
okay.
That doesn't seem like what he has a problem.
because
Oh,
they
these
didn't
people
cast-
people have not seen Joker yet.
because
so-
they didn't cast a black woman as the Joker, or
no,
why?
he has a black
Because-
girlfriend in the movie.
Oh,
Well,
I can't spoil much.
I don't
She
want you to
plays
spoil it. I want
she
someone to
plays
see
an
it,
integral
so-
she plays an integral role in the movie, but it has nothing to do with it. The point is that has nothing to do with the movie. The movie has a lot of really good messages to say about how we treat people how we treat mental health and how we treat society and the complex interactions between classes and people, and it has a lot of important things to say. That's not one of them.
Right.
Mm.
But if you believe in the death of the author, strictly speaking, then you can say the Joker has a problem with black women, and that interpretation of the film is
Right.
equally as valid as any
So,
other interpretation.
What I've noticed specifically, and this is something that's far more, because I sort of view myself as somewhere stuck between the left and the right when it comes to this sort of thing. But people on the left tend to believe that you cannot separate the artist from the art, right? So you look at the great works of the people in the past, like you cannot appreciate an artwork of Hitler, right? So Hitler was actually a semi-decent painter, and some of his artworks are still on display. And they're better than I can do, but you cannot say it's good because of Hitler and who he was, right? Even though it's a picture of like flowers in some field, right? I've always been a firm believer of you separating the artist from the art, especially growing up the way we did, sort of a repressed, if you will, sheltered Christian evangelical culture. Like I could listen to music by bands that were overtly like the black metal sort. I could still say, hey, they wrote fantastic solos, right? But even that would have been frowned upon by that culture because it says if it doesn't fit our narrative, it's out completely. You cannot have anything that you like about it. And sort of my interpretation also being, I mean, Michael and I, in a lot of the same paths, were immersed in certain arts, especially literature. And what we gained from that is the understanding that it doesn't matter if you agree with the author, you can still garner some truth from what is written.
Exactly.
And so when it comes to watching things like movies, right, it's once again, this is the thing I talked about in the last video. Whenever there's two parties to a conversation, each person assumes a different role. The first person who is listening has the objective goal of understanding what the other person actually means, and the speaker has the goal of conveying his truth in as pure and unadulterated a manner as he possibly can. So when we're talking about watching a movie, your goal is to understand the intent of what is being put down, right? So it's different than when you're watching a Michael Bay movie as opposed to whenever you're watching a Stanley Kubrick movie, right? Because if you're watching Stanley Kubrick, the color of the curtains might be significant. Why? Because you're watching Stanley Kubrick. And if you're watching Michael Bay, I guess nothing matters. Just gawk at the pretty explosion. I don't know.
It's just,
or
does it?
It's just
profound.
No,
does it?
no. That's actually really interesting. Because,
Exactly.
No,
Go for it.
Pull into something like the Star Wars movie. All right, Star Wars Episode 8. Really, really vast. Like you got people on a very wide spectrum of beliefs about how good the Star Wars Episode 8 was. Here's the deal. I think it's a piece of shit. All right. I think the movie is garbage. I think the story is garbled. I think it's illogical. Plot holes abound. It ruins pre-established characters. It directly contradicts established canon. Or does it? It does. But
I disagree with you.
Objectively, I can win that argument 10 times out of 10. Just from the content of the film.
Continue.
But that's not the point. The special effects in that movie were still fucking amazing. Like top tier, grade A.
Except
hundreds of $1 million.
Plasma bolts curve in space.
I think the point my friend is trying to reach is that you can still appreciate like
the quality and the work that went into creating that thing. Like it took a team of artists an exorbitant amount of time to create the details on a thing that wound up being a part of a convoluted mess of a story.
But I don't think it's necessarily convoluted. I think Rian Johnson's treatment of Luke Skywalker is probably the most realistic treatment of Luke Skywalker that you could read.
May I pose you a question, Michael?
Oh, buddy, can we derail the conversation? Just argue about Star Wars?
Yes, please.
I'm about to. We're about to.
I'm the biggest Luke Skywalker fanboy there is.
May I interject with something real quick?
Let's go.
May I interject with something real quick?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
So, Michael, earlier you were talking about a movie. I think it was called The Lighthouse or something.
Yes.
I don't follow current movies.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a crap movie. It made us uncomfortable. But as cinema, it wasn't bad.
Okay. And that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly the contention I would have here. And that's saying, like, you can watch a movie with a story, or it doesn't even matter if you think it's a good story. You can find it grating. And at the same time, you should still be able to appreciate aspects of it, like the cinematography, that you think are of good merit, right? Unfortunately, I think the trend that is following most of us, the trend of sort of both the evangelical culture from which we spring and the social justice culture within which we live espouse, say that if something is bad about a thing, you can't like that thing.
Right.
Yes.
Which is wrong.
right.
Completely wrong.
Yeah. You have to be able to separate the person. You have to be able to, yes.
Separate the artist from the art.
Right. Exactly.
There you
That's
go.
the best way of saying it.
What
All right.
basically what
Argue
he,
about Star Wars.
basically
Roll
what,
like
what he said from the very beginning. Separate the artist and the art. Because we did come from the upbringing where it's like you can't listen to Black Sabbath because they were bad people.
Because Ozzy Osbourne snorted a line of fire ants one point in time, which I think is
Sure.
pretty badass, if I'm going to be honest. I don't think I would do it, but like, you know what? Props to the guy for being able to have that constitution.
Like
Let's argue about Luke Skywalker. though.
My Chemical Romance
me,
was
bro.
hidden in a subfolder. Like most 15-year-olds hide porn deep inside their subfolders and hidden files. I was hiding My Chemical Romance and
They
like
are.
Demon Hunter.
They're coming back
okay?
though. They're coming back.
They are. I'm really excited.
All right. I just want to hear you guys argue about Star Wars. I'll sit back.
Let's argue about Luke Skywalker. All right. You think that it was a betrayal of his character in The Last Jedi, correct?
So, but we need to start back from like what we saw of Luke Skywalker in the episodes where he like in the established canon.
In The New Hope,
what was his
Empire,
character?
and Return of the Jedi, correct?
Yes, we have a character.
The mistake that I made initially and that you're making now is assuming that Return of the Jedi.
Screw you,
You
Jono.
haven't even heard what I have to say.
Ah!
yet. I'm out.
At least
This is Sparta, I guess.
is assuming
I will
that
now be
Return
replaced by this glass of bourbon.
is assuming that Return of the Jedi is the end of the story.
No, it's not.
Exactly. That's why I think The Last Jedi is important.
Okay.
He becomes human in that. If you read the books, and I'm assuming you've read the books, some of the books. Anyway.
Okay, the books are no longer canon.
Exactly.
They don't relate to the
Exactly.
new movies. Okay.
They weren't realistic.
I have
as fun
not
as
read
they
the
were,
books.
As they fun as they were. Okay, for context, in the books, Luke Skywalker becomes God tier. Like
Sure, I believe it.
he attains a power of the Force, which is over that of his father, of any Jedi and Sith Lord beforehand. He can hold people down from light years away. He becomes God tier in the books. And that's great. That's fun. That's fantastic. But it's not realistic. That is why The Last Jedi is realistic. Because it looks at Luke Skywalker from a human point of view. It looks at him from a person who achieves this level of certain idealism. He saves his father. And then he continues about his life. And everything goes to crap.
So I would like to hear what Taylor has to say about this.
No, go
Oh,
ahead.
about Star Wars?
Yeah.
Episode
I
8 apparently.
think you guys have more of an opinion on that than I do. So, yes.
All right, and back to you two.
Jono, go.
So- But you look at the character that we saw develop through episode 4, 5, and 6. It wasn't just like it wasn't just like it's not just a period of a couple of weeks of his life. Like there was
It's
a
his
big
years.
time. Yeah, it's years. There was a time skip between 4 and 5 and 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And what you saw, he was kind of a punk at the beginning.
Oh,
he was,
yeah.
he was 100% a
absolutely.
punk.
He's a whiny punk.
Yeah, he's a whiny punk brat. And through the course of the series, you see him grow and mature. But the one thing that is always consistent about his character is that he is the new hope.
Right.
And he always has that hope. Like, he looked at Darth Vader, who was the most feared figure in the galaxy, like the figurehead for evil. He was like Hitler of the galaxy. And he saw good in that person to the very end. Like, when there was no evidence for it whatsoever, he was the one who had hope.
Yeah.
And at the end of episode 6, he even sees that hope come to fruition. He was given no reason, like in the established story that we have thus far, he brought hope to others. He learned to, and he believed in himself and in the power of the Force and of good to overcome evil, even if it meant reaching out and sacrificing himself to go and fight Darth Vader.
Mm.
And he went and he sacrificed himself in fighting Darth Vader and facing off against the Emperor, and like to the bitter end. Like he was going to die right there on that balcony, like on that bridge, for his convictions and the fact that he had believed in his father.
Right in that
And
moment,
then it
yes.
worked. It actually happened. Like it came to fruition and he was proven right. And Anakin came back and threw the Emperor off. And like that was the confirmation of his entire arc, that hope prevails above all. And that was the defining characteristic of Luke's character from his introduction as a character through his entire arc, through his development, through his highs and his lows that we saw in episode 4 and 5 into 6. Like the consummation of his character is he is the one that always has hope.
Yeah, Michael.
But then we
Wait
come
for it.
but then we come into episode 7, into the end of episode 7. Grant, and he had like 5 seconds of screen time at the end of that movie, but we come into that seeing Luke Skywalker and we're like, okay, this character that we saw as like this beacon of hope for the galaxy that we've been looking for this entire movie, all of a sudden that's the end. And we come to episode 8, and the first thing that Rian Johnson has him do is take that lightsaber, his father's lightsaber, or I'm sorry, his own.
Yeah, his own.
It was like that one was his own.
Father's in his
Which
own.
plot hole. I wish they would explain that. Anyway, he just poof, tosses it over his shoulder. I mean, what the hell, right? What's it all about? And then they ham fist in, and it's like, that's, first of all, what did you just do to an established character? Like, we came in with reasonably expecting, like perfectly reasonably expecting, this character who is the embodiment of hope to be a point of reference for us for this story. And he has sequestered himself on an island, essentially on the farthest reaches of the galaxy, because he has no hope.
Mm.
And if you are going to pull that card, we need to know why. And we need a damn good reason why he went from the one who saw good in the most vile of places to the one who can't see any good in anyone, not even himself. And the explanation that they give in episode 8, where they're like, well, he tried one thing and it kind of went bad, and then he just kind of gave up on life existence in the entire galaxy and said fuck it and ran away and ditched his best friend and his sister-in-law, well, best friend's girlfriend, and like just fucked off to the edge of the galaxy and gave up on existence.
And that's a good point.
You want me to?
And
Michael,
give my
you're on a
rebuttal?
torch.
Yeah, by all means, because the movies, what we are given in episode 8, there is nothing in episode 8 that comes anywhere close to justifying that dramatic of a shift. It feels like we missed
I'm going to
a
have to pull the
trilogy.
gavel out at some point and just be
Okay,
Michael's floor.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Like we missed, like you can't just go from positive to absolute opposite. You've got to have some kind of development there. And episode 8 did not justify that kind of character development. It just threw it at us and expected us to accept it.
Could have been a grumpy old man. A lot of
No,
grumpy
well,
old man.
in short, you're correct. In episode 8, we are given a Luke that is completely disillusioned with everything, which is the most human interaction you can expect. We are given a Luke which doesn't believe in hope anymore, which is completely anathema to the Luke we were given in episode 6, which proves the point all the more of the hope we were given in episode 4. Hope persists without Luke Skywalker being there. Luke doesn't have to believe in it to hope to endure, for hope to endure. He does not believe anymore. He is given a reason to believe, and he doesn't want to. He absolutely does not want to, but he is forced to by the end of it. Why? because hope transcends the human sort of quality of embracing it and then giving it up. He gives it up somewhere in those 30 years between episode 6 and episode 7. He gives it up. He goes into hiding. Han and Leia's son, Seed of Skywalker, gives it completely abandons the good and turns towards evil. Why wouldn't that make Luke give up hope? But he does. For whatever reason you want to extrapolate or give for that, he gives it up. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong for that. It's a human reaction to the circumstances that he is dealt. And then he is given the hope which transcends his ability to understand in Rey.
Gavel.
You know, I would normally
by all
like,
means.
knock
Yeah,
the gavel, but I would also
I thought
accept
you
some
wanted
Elijah
a
Craig.
gavel, and then you were going to let.
My response is much shorter, but
Oh.
it's just as concise.
We're
Hope
not-
transcends the human experience. Hope transcends the human understanding.
May-
And that's where Luke finds himself. He
Okay.
finds himself believing in hope again, even though he doesn't want to. And that's why he sends himself in what is it? Force spectral form
Yeah.
to Jakku to fight off Kylo Ren.
But first, a word from our sponsors, or you're not our sponsors,
Potential sponsors.
but you could
People
be.
you
Elijah Craig
want.
whiskey is one of my all-time favorites, and they could be helping pay for this, but they're not, and they should be, because they're
Oh my god.
bringing out the personalities we see before us now.
Elijah Craig Bourbon Whiskey.
Elijah
Available
Craig,
at retailers near
my
you.
favorite reverend. So,
Mm.
and back to the show.
Oh, can I?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
I understand both your points, and like if someone's going to be like the epicenter of hope and then they go to the complete opposite spectrum, you do want a good reason. But then it also makes sense that like sometimes like you were seen as like the epicenter of hope and then you become disillusioned, but still you have to keep on hoping for everyone else, and that would be like really hard to
And
do.
that's why he hides himself away.
But I do agree they should have given a reason, because you just are like, what happened?
See, I'm going to give
That's-
the very unpopular opinion here, and I think that the Star Wars movies were never that deep to begin with. So,
Well, probably not. But we can argue over it. We can
I
argue
mean,
over
we could argue. We can still argue over it. The first episodes 4, 5, and 6 stumbled upon greatness.
Hey, now, I love episode 1.
Oh, I actually like the Phantom Menace as well.
Phantom Menace is very deep.
Surprisingly so. Okay, but time out. We're talking about episode 8. I like what you had to say. Could you?
It's the most human response to the circumstances he finds himself in.
Okay, but you said something. You said something really important there that didn't. You said something really important there that didn't happen, which was that Kylo or Ben Skywalker turned to the
Ben
dark.
Solo.
Ben Solo turned to the dark side, and that's what turned Luke off of his journey. Ben Solo had inklings of, or a tendency towards, an affinity for the dark side, and Luke made the ridiculous and completely irrational, especially for his character, given what he saw in his father, who was already dark, assumption that he was going to become evil and I must slay him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is completely contradictory to the established canon and the character that we've seen thus far.
No, because Luke himself was caught up in the ideology of the light side. You saw Yoda come back in episode 8, correct?
But he wasn't caught up in the ideology of the light side, because even
But he was.
But even
The
he,
sacred text, he said that. That was one of the lines he had in episode 8, the sacred text.
he didn't come to that island for the sacred texts.
No, but
Like,
he wanted to protect them. He had an attachment to them because they were of the light side.
but the sacred texts had nothing to do with his decision to kill Ben Solo.
Yes, they absolutely did.
No, because the sacred texts were way off at the first temple, which is where he was on the island.
Right. But they were of the Jedi. They were of the light side.
But that was that
Purely of the
the
strictly light side
the
perspective
sacred,
on things.
but the sacred texts came way later. He did not have access to those until
no, but they
he
came
later
before
left.
him, and he found them.
But he didn't have them. That wasn't why he started the temple.
No, but Yoda and Obi-Wan were why he went to look for that temple.
Where does that happen in the movie?
That doesn't happen in the movie. There's 30 years space in there for
we
him
don't
to do a
but
lot
we
of
don't
things.
see that.
Right. Why would you say, though, that he couldn't come to a point where he was at the Obi-Wan and Yoda level of ideology?
I do think it's one of the strengths of this perspective of your position that the Jedi have a tendency to sequester themselves away from the world whenever there's problems. But the whole idea of the original trilogy was that he didn't. Like Yoda told him, you need to stay and train.
Right, that was the idea of the original trilogy.
And he said, no, I'm not going to stay and train. I'm going to go out and act. And I'm going to bring the goodness out of evil. And I'm going to redeem my father.
But
I think I do agree. It's really out of character that he was like, let's kill Ben Solo because this is totally what I would do instead of maybe talking to him and being like, hey, let's talk about this.
It shows it shows the consequence of aging. It shows the consequence of getting bogged down in the ideology, the position with which you find yourself in.
Are you saying that he just became really old and forgot his ideologies
that
he had when he was young?
Yes.
So
he got comfortable.
When you get older, sometimes the ideologies that you had when you were younger gets more solidified.
They need to be reevaluated. Absolutely. Yes.
But we don't see that.
No, we don't.
We're never told.
We don't
see that. We're never told that. It's just all of a sudden he is, instead of being the kind of person who sees good in all people, he is now the kind of person who sees the slightest inkling of evil and decides he has to destroy it.
Absolutely. That's the most human response for someone in that position.
But the most human response for Luke Skywalker in the original trilogy would have been to keep his droids, go fuck off to the city and party with his friends. But that's not the development. Like, that's not what we got from his character.
No, that's not. We got this god tier character that knew how to do everything right.
No, he didn't do everything right because he disobeyed his master and left.
Yeah, but it was the right choice. Was it?
Was it a good decision in episode 5?
His father ended up turning back to the light side.
But was it the right decision? Because the whole point of the hero's journey is that he has to go out and he has to fail at something, or at least
he has to learn that he's wrong. Right, and he has to come to the realization of his inadequacies in order to overcome them. And come back to. That's why you have, like, in episode 5 he fails. In episode 5 he gets his father's like, because he doesn't think he's wrong. Well, hold on. In episode 5 he comes to the point where he's like, no, you can come back to the light. And Vader says, ha, nah, fuck that. Let's go rule the galaxy together. Cuts off his arm and his son jumps off into the abyss. But because Luke was not prepared, like, he wasn't ready. He wasn't sufficiently developed in his perspective to properly bring that goodness out of his father. It wasn't until the next episode, having learned from his mistakes and gone back to reconcile with his master, that he was able to face Vader willingly and actually overcome him. That his perspective didn't change, though. His argument did. His argument grew. Yes. But that is what episode 8 was showing us. That his argument didn't grow. That he continued in this perspective where the good could be found in all people. If you couldn't find good in people, then you kill them. But at no point in the entirety of the series do we ever see a point where he says that.
Gentlemen, may I remind you, we are on a live podcast.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
And it's great.
So, common ground would be a good goal.
The common ground is that we both love them.
We both love Luke. I love the character that Luke was.
And I love the character that Luke is.
And I'm hoping that this Star Wars niche brings in a whole lot of new.
We got our tickets for 12:15 a.m. on the 20th.
Well, I knew nothing about this, but
I do.
Thank God that you guys did. And perhaps it'll bring a whole new ring of followers to this channel. But
One day I'm going to have a YouTube channel and I'm going to talk about these things. But for the
And you'll
time
tag
being,
Matt
we're
on
on
them.
Zach's homeschool.
Oh yeah.
Zach's homeschool YouTube channel where he talks
Oh.
about growing up as a sequestered homeschooler.
He wasn't
And,
that sequestered.
Oh no, much less
No,
than
see, here's
me
the
or
thing.
him.
that was never the intention of this channel. This was the intention of this
What
channel
was the
was to sort
intention?
of like to express and talk about the ideas that I had come to since then. But since I've only had this other homeschooler on my channel before, that was sort of what things centered on. But for all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed this chaotic as well, very chaotic.
Well, we can have a
discussion.
conversation too.
And we will, I'm sure. But
We were talking about the point was we were supposed to be talking,
We were talking
about
about
the
the
relation,
author.
the relationship between the intent, like what
What is
responsibility.
your actual perspective on the death of the author? Because you're asking the question.
and this sounds like a topic for another podcast.
Let him go,
No. So
Let him go. Let him go.
because I actually had a really great revelation about this last night, because I was speaking with an artist friend of mine.
Okay.
So my original, I came into this thinking the death of the author was was kind of a stupid idea. The author has,
Yeah, why could he die?
well, but the idea that the author's responsibility ends as soon as he creates it.
Right.
And my impression
Okay.
was that the author should take as much responsibility as he possibly can for making his message perfectly clear.
Mm,
You don't agree?
And the viewers have as much responsibility, should take on as much responsibility as they can to interpret it as close to the
So,
as
what I
respectfully
said
as
at
they
the
can.
beginning of the show.
Yeah.
There are two
Yay.
parties to a conversation. There is the speaker and there is the listener. The speaker's job is to speak with the words that he thinks that the receiver will best understand. And receiver, their job is to interpret as best as they think the author's
What were you
or
gonna
the
say though?
speaker's message was.
I don't know. I was like a poetry writer type person. I like
Yeah.
writing stuff that people won't understand. And I'm like, now it's up to you guys to interpret it, but I bet you won't understand what I meant it to be.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think some authors, they mean there to be a lot of obscurity and for people to interpret it how they wish. And then a lot of authors are like, well, this is it really depends on the type of writing, I think.
So I think it depends on I think it does
Yeah.
depend on the type of writing. So for example, if you're talking about history, right? You've got like a guy like Herodotus, who is literally just recording history. Like, granted, Herodotus
From a
was
Greek perspective.
he was very colorful in the way he chose to record the events, right?
From a Greek perspective.
But from a modern perspective, our job is not to sort of find out, like what are all the implications about the way he said things. Like, that might be an implication, but the best implication is to figure out what he literally meant.
Right, but that necessarily brings into account the implications.
Let me choose a better
I
example.
was gonna say you're not wrong.
Let
I
me,
like
let me
that.
choose a better example. All right. So a court reporter, all right, their job is to literally just
Right.
give an image of what transpired in a courtroom.
To
right?
the best of your ability.
To the best of their ability, right? You have to
Which
take- you have
is
to take,
necessarily bound by the culture in which they find themselves.
Whoa,
and you're not wrong. You're
That
not
was-
wrong.
that was a big
What-
jump.
What I'm saying though is that our job as interpreting, say, the work of a courtroom interpreter or recorder is to figure out what exactly transpired there. So long as the goal is the same, the approach will be the same. So long as we try to dilly-dally with the minutia of whatever the courtroom reporter might have been thinking at that moment, I think we get lost.
Not necessarily, though.
It depends on the
they're
honor-
bound by the culture in which they find themselves. They're bound by the language with which they find themselves in.
Well, and let me.
Let's let Taylor go. She has
I was
a
gonna say, go ahead. I
Yeah.
really liked what you had to say a minute ago.
Oh, thanks. I'm gonna throw a wrench in the conversation, and be like, what about the Bible? Okay.
No, you're absolutely right.
That's a really important part of the conversation, because that is a book which a lot of people say has one extremely rigid my interpretation.
And I would disagree with that. And I think we all would be in agreement about that. So I think there are specific passages of the Bible that are meant to convey one message, right? Specifically, the ones that come to mind are those that concern the law, right? The law is meant to convey a very specific meaning, because that's the nature of law in and of itself.
Confined to the cultural space in which it found itself.
Confined to the cultural space in which it found itself and the interpretation of language thereof. But what we're
That
talking
matters. That matters.
It does matter, but we're
Both
talking
of
about
those statements had a lot of weight behind them.
right. But we're talking about this versus a passage like the ever popular John 3:16, which has applications which in scope span way more
Oh yeah.
than one specific.
Absolutely, I
meaning.
would agree with that.
So in scope, could you say that like a Levitical passage regarding the way an animal ought to be sacrificed in John 3:16 are comparable? Like, could you say they're
No,
comparable
you
in
couldn't
scope?
say they're comparable.
No, they're not comparable in scope. That's what I'm saying. So there is a limitation to our valid ability to interpret something that we all view as objective, as opposed to sort of just free reign interpreting anything any number of ways, right? Because we're all objectivists in a sense, not in the Randian sense, but we're objectivists in the sense that we believe in objective truth.
But I don't think the Randian, and correct me if I'm wrong, but
Time out. Could you explain for the layman among us what the Randian sense means?
You
Yeah.
know, there
I
was a
haven't
few
heard that.
books written on that,
Yeah.
and I'm not about to recite them. So,
So I assume you mean Ayn Rand.
I do mean Ayn
You
Rand.
libertarian schmucks.
I don't think necessarily it matches up with the evolutionary perspective, correct? The naturalistic perspective, correct?
The objectivist Randian sense does match up with the.
I don't think that
evolutionary.
necessarily contrasts with the biblical perspective.
And
biblical
I
perspective.
agree with you. I agree with you, because the literal objectivist stance that I just said I did not support implied that there was a time frame of basically the span of your life, and that's it. So basically the central moral virtue is that of doing what is best for yourself in the long term, right? But for Ayn Rand, long term meant until you were 80 and died, right? So therefore, there's no good inclination, there's no good reason, no incentive to give money to your children upon your passing, because that's not good for you. According to Rand's, Randian objectivism, you ought to spend that for yourself frivolously before you die.
Mm.
And what I would argue is that she was mostly correct. Ayn Rand was mostly correct, except for the condition of the term over which you are considering her values. So you ought to do what's best for yourself, but we as Christians consider eternity as being a part of that. What is best for ourselves concerning eternity? Precisely that which is prescribed in the Bible, but more specifically in the law. And then the question is, what is the best means of achieving that? Well, Jesus, obviously, but some may beg to differ.
I think that if you read John, specifically John,
The gospel or
the gospel
Okay.
of John, you find a lot more there than you bargained for.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh.
Wait, no. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God.
And the Word was God.
God.
And the Word was in the beginning with God.
And
then-
nothing was made without him, and nothing that is made was made without him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a Bible quote.
Then the
Which-
Word became flesh.
Right.
Yes,
And dwelt
there
among
Dwelt
us.
among us.
I was doing the abridged version.
Why do I
Thank
still
you.
remember? Why do I still remember these things?
Because they're important.
They are important.
Anyway, so I'm sorry. Go ahead. Where are we going?
So what I'm saying is that the law that was given to us was good. in a sense. Like literally, if you look up on YouTube or any other platform, atheists who have come up with a system of morality. So my favorites is Stefan Molyneux. He's a fantastic YouTuber.
I need to look
was.
that guy up.
How do you spell it?
I'm not about to spell it on this live stream.
Well, I'm trying to get people to reference it.
He's probably the one I've heard the most.
Stefanmolyneux. So he was he was born in Britain and raised in Canada. He's fantastic. He's got a beautiful radio voice, way better than mine will ever be.
Mhm.
I was on his YouTube channel, which is way more popular than mine will ever be. And this was back after the fraternity scandal, which we're not going to talk about tonight. And
Fraternity scandal.
Mm.
yeah,
Some other time.
some other time we'll get into the fraternity scandal.
It's not much of a scandal.
It's just bureaucrats doing what bureaucrats do. But anyway, so he is, at least I believe he is still an atheist, right? And he did his best from the interpretation of literally nothing but, logical observation of the universe to derive a system of morality. And it turns out that his system of morality, which he calls UPV or UPB, universally preferable behavior, he actually wrote a book with that title, mirrors almost directly that law which was given in ancient times to the Jewish people and to ourselves
You're
as
referring
well.
specifically the Ten Commandments, correct? Or Noahidic law, even prior to that.
Right. So not necessarily the Ten Commandments, but many aspects of the Mosaic law, right? And also the Noahic law.
I would say Noahic before Mosaic, because Mosaic creates a lot of purity laws, which
regardless,
Mosaic with the exclusion
let
of
John think.
Levitical.
No, regardless, I'm interested in hearing what he came up with because I actually much prefer Peterson's perspective on this.
Right, but I'm saying that from the perspective of secular humanists, which develop their own systems of law, right? So Peterson also has done a very similar thing to Stefan Molyneux, except Stefan Molyneux, when he developed this, at least, he was very much an ardent atheist, right? And he developed a remarkably similar system of law just based on observation about what was good for people's interests, right? So like what's good for you, Jono? And he considered that, and he developed a whole system of law around that, and it's remarkably similar, right, to what we actually see in the Bible. So the ways in which it differ, much like Ayn Rand's philosophy, are those areas which concern things which outlive us, right? So, for example, the question of forgiveness is one which outlives us, right? So like if you forgive someone who never will pay you back, right? You have someone who owes you a debt and they will never pay you back. Well, then why should you forgive them if you don't expect a profit from it? That makes no sense in Rand's world. It makes no sense in any atheistic perspective. But if you consider the fact that there might be something after this life, something which is binding after this life, something that which may be profited from after this life, that is the point at which the philosophy starts to make sense. And that is the bridge that these sort of atheistic philosophers will not cross because they refuse to believe in anything other than a mechanistic worldview.
And naturalistic.
There's nothing beyond this world. There's nothing beyond the observable.
After you die, it's darkness.
After you die, it's darkness. That sort of worldview, which is that which Ayn Rand adopted. And I got to be honest, I'm a big fan of Ayn Rand, especially Atlas Shrugged, which I thought was one of the most brilliant books I've ever read, because I thought she was absolutely right until she started talking about things like children. So why should you give a crap about what your children do or what they think, right? Like, why should you should you care about proliferation?
Because they're essential to the continuation of society, to the stability of continued society.
Why do you care about that? Why do you care about continuing society? Why do you care about anything other than what is good for you in your immediate world?
I've got a timeout because I have not actually read Ayn Rand. I'm sorry, your perspective.
But
no,
your
okay.
argument is spot on. Your argument is spot on.
Well,
Your perspectives have been really valuable so far, and I really appreciate it.
well, what if it's because you want to you built something in your life and you want that to continue on? Maybe it's not your children,
Like you want a
maybe it's
statue built in your honor. Like that's
or-
I think
Or
that
employees.
or
a lot of-
you started a school and you're like, now my kids will run it, or you
Or
built a castle and you want someone to maintain
my further
it.
question is
I don't know.
why is that valuable to you?
Because you don't
Mm.
want everything that you did to go to waste.
I see what you mean, because what you're saying is that if when I cease to exist, everything that I do and ever will do will cease to have value to me.
Right. Why
Should I invest in
why
something
should
that
you
will outlive
care?
me?
Why should you
Well-
care if you have a statue built in your honor? Why?
Because then everything that you've done is now worthless. So what's the point of doing anything?
Exactly.
So then what's the point of doing it? Well, if we're going to get really into the Rainian point of view, everything you're doing currently is also worthless.
Okay, I'm
Right.
starting.
Why
I'm
do
starting.
anything?
I'm
Why
starting
do
to understand
anything?
why people don't like Ayn Rand, because that's just some.
I know.
That's-
This
Rand-
drives you to a Rick and Morty sort of point of view. It's like, what's the point of anything?
Yeah,
Nothing has a
100%.
point.
Like
No,
when I'm
he's
gone,
absolutely right.
nothing matters.
So
fuck it,
in
man.
academic terms, it's the point of view of the existentialists. So Kierkegaard not being among them, even though he was the father of existentialism. We're talking about
But
Nietzsche.
he didn't. He
We're talking
was an
about
existentialist,
Camus.
but he found meaning regardless.
Well, it's only because of his eternal perspective, which is what I'm arguing for at this point.
Correct. You are
Right.
correct.
So we're talking about guys like Camus, Descartes, right? The
Yes.
nihilists.
Descartes was a good Catholic, though. He changed his perspective once he had to rebuild. Like, he couldn't not rebuild.
I love the nihilists. I love them all because
They're
Yeah.
not wrong.
No,
it's
and
Solomon.
Nietzsche-
It's Solomon.
At
Vanity
least-
of vanities. All
At
is
least
vanity.
they were honest. At least
Vanity
they were
of
consistent.
vanities.
No,
All is vanity.
At least they acknowledged that
all is vanity
when-
and grasping for the wind.
And you're
And he's
you're
not
exactly
wrong.
right. You're both exactly right. So Nietzsche is arguably my
God bless that man. I'm sorry he's burning in hell.
No, he's Nietzsche is arguably my favorite philosopher for that reason. And it's
But is he,
because
though?
he was
Likewise.
exactly honest and he was exactly right about almost everything he said. Unfortunately, because he refused to go that extra mile and believe there could be something more than this tangible existence. The natural conclusion of that is nihilism.
Mhm.
The natural conclusion is if there is no maker, if there is no purpose, if there is no divine creation, then what are you supposed to do with yourself? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You might as well live to please yourself, right?
But
At
that's
least-
what Solomon says, too.
exactly.
He
Exactly.
wrote it long before any of them did.
That's what grants
The
I
duty of man
think a lot of
is
authority to
use
Nietzsche.
his labor and enjoy the work of his labor and his toil under the sun.
Right. You make your own purpose, which is a contention of Nietzsche's.
But it's not necessarily wrong. If you couple that
Well,
with
you,
if you couple that with cheers.
Cheers. I'll cheers your vape.
You have my glass.
The whole duty of man is to obey God and to keep his commandments for every secret.
If you couple
everything
that
will
with
be
a
revealed. Every secret thing. and
if you
every good and
couple
evil
that
thing.
with a transcendent purpose, then yes.
It's perfect.
If
you
you're right.
couple
What-
the,
you're
what he
right.
said-
if
what
you
he
couple
said
the
is
nihilist
important.
with the transcendent, it is flawless. But you have to couple them both. You
You
can't have one without the other.
You're right.
Because otherwise you end up in a place of complete nihilism, or you end up in a place of complete transcendentalism, which is useless. It's useless.
And we've been sort of caught between both worlds. We've been caught between the world of complete transcendentalism, which I'll call the evangelical culture, which says it doesn't matter what you do in this world as long as you don't sin, right? So as long as
You have to not. No, I wouldn't say it that way. I would say it. You have to not sin.
right.
Yes.
That's true.
So you
What
just
he said.
your best life is you keeping yourself in a corner, in which case you don't sin, and as long as you don't interact with
And
the
then the
world,
nihilist perspective, which is you
The
doesn't matter
opposite.
what you do.
it doesn't matter what you do
When it's both.
so long as you have you're pursuing self-actualization, which is like the bettering of yourself.
No, that doesn't even matter either.
right, but
In a
still,
nihilist perspective,
still it'll make you feel better.
That's
potentially.
And
if you subscribe to
Nietzsche-
that viewpoint.
if we're sticking with Nietzsche's perspective, then yes, it'll make you feel better, right? So you're doing the best that you can do, and you're constantly riding that curve of self-improvement until you get to a point where you die, basically,
Mhm.
right? So what we're talking about, I think what we're all mutually arguing for in different ways is sort of a perspective that rides the line between the two, that says it absolutely does matter what you do in this world, yet it absolutely does matter what happens in the life after.
Right.
Therefore, you should align your passions with this life, your ambitions, your self-actualization with that which is eternal.
Whoa. Okay, so just to recap, because two very distant points just connected for me whenever you said that. We started. Could you repeat what you just said? Because I want to hear it again before I butcher it.
All right. So the sort of nihilistic point of view is it doesn't matter what you do in this life, therefore you should pursue pleasure, and the highest pleasure of those pleasures is that of self-actualization, that is of self-betterment, right? So you become the best person you could possibly.
So when you consume media, the highest goal of the consumption of a creation is to gain from it whatever you desire. When you watch a movie, what you gain from it is the greatest good, because that is all that there is what is good for you. Continue.
Right. So the other side of that coin is that everything does matter, right? There is an eternal perspective, right? So everything that you do in this life actually matters in the next. And what that interpretation gives you is an objective set of goals that you have to abide by. So what you're actually looking for is an intersection between the two, like your happy place.
So we'll time out real quick. So then the flip side of that is that there is objective value in the interpretation that was intended by the creator, because it is transcendent. That the interpretation that the creator designed to go into their piece of art, which they pushed off and handed off to the consumer, has a transcendent value that extends beyond the end of their life. And what the purpose of the generation of art is to find a connection point between
it's a
consumer
correspondence
and the
between
creator.
the two. It is between the mundane and the eternal.
Mm-hmm.
That is what the best art is. It is not just merely an expression of worldly talent or worldly understanding. It is an expression of a connection between that which we view as mundane and that which we view as eternal. That is why that explains my taste in movies for sure. Those are the movies that make me think that Lighthouse.
No.
All right.
Hey,
Can we
Lighthouse.
agree to say that this is a good place to end this cast?
Yes.
Yes, I think that
Absolutely.
came around full circle.
Ladies and
Zach,
gentlemen,
thank you for suffering with us through this.
l'chaim.
Whatever he said.
There's nothing in
Cheers.
To all you out there, thanks for watching.
That was damn good.